I just get worked up about this.
No, I mean, I'm seriously not hearing anything that's making me sound bearish on silver, right? Like, you ask for it. Come on, tell me something. What makes you not bullish on silver right now?
Right. Well, it's hard. The one thing I would say is that I can think of one
How
thing.
to stump Peter Krauth. Ask him why people would argue against silver.
Right. I mean, to be fair, right?
Hey everyone, welcome to SatPulse. Today we're talking inside the market, and I have got the great Peter Krauth, the author of Great Silver Bull and also publisher of the Silver Stock Investor. Now, this is an investor stock newsletter, and they pride themselves on what they say being the only silver newsletter focused on silver. So, Peter, welcome to our show today.
Patrick, it is my pleasure, and I'm thrilled to be here talking to you for the first time face to face.
So as you guys know on this event already, we're going to be talking to Peter, and he's going to be there as a speaker at the Silver Symposium. For you guys who haven't already signed up, please remember, first of all, like, share, subscribe, follow Peter, get the news out, because I'm telling you, the reason I have Peter here is I said, Rob, I saw this video you did, and I was like, I need to talk to Peter. He's saying everything that I want to hear, and I think he's right on the money. Let's get him back on. You guys can come and hear more of this at the Silver Symposium, September 29th to October 1st. We're going to be talking a lot about the same conversations we're having today. So please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment if you got questions on stuff you guys want to hear or people you want to hear perspectives from. So we'll get right into it, Peter. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, you talk about this word volatility. And when we talk about silver, you have a perspective that I rarely hear, which is instead of everything is on fire, you talk something like what my favorite author, Sun Tzu, said, was it's in the midst of chaos, there's always opportunity. And you approach this idea of volatility very different. So let's take a second and catch up our listeners here as to silver and why you think that there's this volatility going on right now.
So thanks for that, Patrick. And, I did want to mention that that is something that in my book, The Great Silver Bull, I talk about to a fair extent. And because I think that it is an opportunity. And I think that one of the problems that investors have is a lack of patience and also what I would call recency bias. So recency bias is always sort of feeling like what comes next is very similar to what's just recently happened. And I think we're in the kind of environment right now in the big picture and also in the near term that it's a mistake basically to think that way. I think that in the big picture, inflation is around. Yes, it's come down considerably. I'm not denying that, at least the headline numbers. But in the big picture, we're in what I call an inflation decade. It's not going away. We're not going back to 2% and at a sustained 2%. In fact, the Fed's talking already. I've heard this multiple times now over the last few months. I've been saying it for a while. When we get past a possible or even perhaps likely recession, expect central banks to start talking about a new target of probably 3%. Mm-hmm. And 2% will not be the new norm. 3% will be the new norm. And obviously, it'll make it easier for them to aim to reach that target because it's 50% higher. So in the near term, talking back to silver is one of these things that is very quiet for long periods and then it explodes. And so it's volatile. It tends to be quite volatile, a multiple of gold's volatility. And I think that investors can and should use that volatility to their advantage, both for silver, physical silver itself, as well as for the companies that operate in the sector.
Yeah, we truly are still seeing that the properties of silver that we have known to love and have relied on for a while are still existing today. And I think one of the things you talked about is this overprinting that has occurred, COVID happening, this helicopter money and the support of the dollar just by money just coming in out of nowhere. These are the things that you talk about. But when you also conversely think about the industrial demand, the demand for silver as we enter this new cycle, help me understand, what do you think happening? Because I've heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, $5,000 gold, $300 silver. And that world to me doesn't sound bad. You guys all know I'm a Bitcoin guy. I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, but I also believe that if you do not hold these precious metals, that you are opening yourself to a risk that you really can't recover from should something happen. If the blockchain goes down for some reason because the internet is off or the power goes out, there's going to cause some delay in you being able to use the blockchain. So you need to have a solution. So my question to you here is, I mean, the hearing 300 silver sounds great to me. I believe in silver. I like gold at 5,000 too. That sounds lovely. What does that look like here?
So, I mean, that's again something that I talk about in my book, and I explain. And it's not, the idea is not to be sensational when I look for, or I forecast an ultimate high in the price of silver. And when I say $300, it's funny because when I started doing the research and trying to see where I could see silver ultimately going, I did it in a very sort of rational way. I looked at prior bull markets. I looked at silver's relationship to other assets, for example, gold, stocks, housing prices. And what happened was, when I looked at where silver peaked in prior bull markets, and I looked at its relationship to these other assets, it's funny because in each instance, it gave me a target price for silver in the $300 range. I mean, in some cases it was, say high 200s. In some cases it was over 330. And so, I mean, I find it silly at this point because we're forecasting anyways to be super specific. And so $300 to me kind of made sense. It was a round number, and it was a bit of an average of all these different indicators. And that's where I see silver realistically potentially going. Now, I'm not saying it's going to go to 300. Stay there, because that would be obviously difficult for industrial users of silver to have to manage. But I think that if we get some kind of a mania and a blow off top, that we could absolutely see silver go to those kinds of prices. And just to go back for a second, when I say I did, the research and the calculations, and I looked at things like the gold silver ratio. I looked at the average home price to silver ratio. I looked at the Dow to silver ratio, S&P to silver ratio. And as an example, you've got the gold silver ratio, which peaked in 1980 when gold and silver both peaked. And so that ratio dropped to 15, meaning it took 15 ounces of silver to buy an ounce of gold.
Yeah.
And so to come to my estimate, what I decided was, okay, I made an assumption. I think that gold could peak in this cycle at $5,000. And if you do a 15-to-1 gold to silver ratio, then you're looking at north of $300 in silver. That's how I got to 300 with the gold price.
And when you actually consider one of the things you discuss, which is an assumption you make there, is that gold would be around $5,000. If you consider that, let's consider what's happening today as we're talking. You've got the St. Petersburg World Economic Forum that's going on right now. You've got the Durban event that's happening with the BRICS nations. Everyone's getting ready to talk about gold-backed digital currencies. So I want to kind of bring that into play here, because we haven't seen this demand for gold even before. We haven't seen people or countries and nations like China hoarding gold as fast as we've seen them doing this last year. You and even Peter D'Rienzio from Silver Institute say we are expecting a huge deficit in silver supply. So the idea of a ridiculous silver deficit, along with the idea of a gold deficit coming and the demand going up because it's going to be backing in some way, shape, or form currencies used around the world for trade and for contracts. How could that not be something that would be in the play here? The idea that gold has a ton of room for upside, especially in dollar denomination, seems rather likely, considering what you again have talked about, this overprinting, overspending, helicopter money, rehypothecating the debt in ways that you can't collect. So I see the idea of $5,000 gold doesn't really trick me very much, right? That doesn't sound so far out there.
Exactly. So you're right, Patrick. I mean, think about it. Who would have thought, in 2001, gold was at about 250 to $50 an ounce. We're at
Yeah.
1900. We've been north of 2000. Is it two or three times now? And, we're hovering in the 1900s. A $5,000 gold level is two and a half times current price. That doesn't sound unlikely to me, given what we've seen with
Yeah.
debts, with the kind of printing, the kind of economic environment, the challenges that we have, and now we have all these sort of geopolitical challenges globally, deglobalization. Now BRICS are talking about bringing in a currency, potentially some sort of a gold-backed currency.
Yep.
I think that they will have a challenge to get that off the ground.
I agree.
But absolutely, absolutely. And there's a lot to give up by having a gold-backed currency. Having a fiat currency that is accepted by your trading partners and others around the world. It's not good for the little guy, but it's very good for the guys that are behind it and who are managing it.
Yeah, that's correct.
So the odds that they would give it up, I think, are not that high. That being said, it does not change the fact that there has been this huge movement. I mean, just try to imagine 10 or 15 years ago, major nations around the world becoming huge buyers, central banks from these countries becoming huge buyers of gold. Unheard of. The talk of moving away from a petrodollar would have been unheard of. And yet, here we are. It's become mainstream talk. It's being covered by mainstream media. Who would have ever thought, right? So for gold to go from 2,000 to 5,000 does not seem like a huge upside target. And again, central banks, if they whether a gold-backed currency that's used globally between trading nations and so on becomes a reality or not, you cannot deny the fact that so many central banks around the world have been aggressive buyers of gold. So either they're preparing for it, or they're buying themselves a ton of insurance that relatively is probably they feel quite cheap still.
Well, we already know that the ruble has been paired to gold, and they're starting to use the ruble to make transactions, not just for oil with Saudi, but they're also using it to make deals for grains. So, and again, within the BRICS nation, you see that India was just told that they had to stop rice exports. What do you think they're going to be using to buy the rice from here on out? So the idea of the dollar becoming less valuable is not just because we're printing money. It's because the dollars are coming back home because countries no longer want the dollar. They no longer are going to be making dollar denominated debt. All they got to do is complete their obligations now for dollar denominated debt. But when supply and the money of supply is abundant, you'll start to see the interest rates get cheaper. And when money is scarce, you see interest rates going up. So this whole dynamic between is silver price going to go up? It's not just a discussion of how valuable is silver. It's also about how unvalue or how much did we devalue the dollar. And so when you start comparing and contrasting the two, it paints a really weird picture.
It sure does. It sure does. And if you, I don't know if you want to go into a little bit of sort of the industrial uses of silver and how that is extremely bullish. I'm happy to talk numbers around.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, please. I'm hearing all about it. I understand that it's not just medicinal needs. It's not just electronics, but solar panels and forecasting for. What are you hearing now? I've heard you guys talk about the huge deficit expectations.
So exactly. Now here, just some sort of broader strokes to start with. Last year there was an all-time record deficit in the silver market of 237 million ounces. That's about 20% of the entire. Sorry, it's about 25, almost 25% of the entire supply was in deficit, and it's about 20% of all demand was a deficit. So demand last year was 1.24 billion ounces. Supply was 1 billion ounces. So think about that. And demand was up 18% last year over 2021. So demand grew 18%. Supply, Patrick, was flat.
Yeah.
Demand grew I'm going to say that again. Demand grew 18%. Supply was flat. Mining was down 1%. The only reason supply was flat was because recycling made up for a little bit of the decline in mining and was actually up about 4 or 5%. Recycling only represents around 15 to 20%. Right. It's just incredible how this market is out of whack. The Silver Institute, came out and said that the deficits of the last 2 years combined more than offset the previous 11 years of surplus. So 2 years wiped out 11 years of surplus, and they still forecast beyond 100 million ounces of deficit again this year and for years going forward. And again, I just get worked up about this.
No, I'm seriously not hearing anything that's making me sound bearish on silver, right? Like, you ask for it. Come on, tell me something. What makes you not bullish on silver right now?
Right. Well, it's hard. The one thing I would say is that I can think of one
How
thing.
to stump Peter Krauth. Ask him why people would argue against silver.
Right. To be fair, right? If there is a recession and a severe recession, I could see the market pricing in, and it's going to be more of a sentiment thing and a temporary thing where they would price in potentially lower use on the industrial side, but it's going to have to be short-lived because it's unrealistic. Solar has become a huge chunk of industrial demand for silver. It's growing at this breakneck pace where you've seen 110 million ounces of silver went into solar alone in 2021. 140 million ounces went into solar last year. The Silver Institute is expecting 160 million ounces for this year. I think that's lowballed. I think that we're going to see closer to 180 or even 200 million ounces of silver go to solar alone. And here are the reasons. The manufacturing capacity is growing at almost 30% a year for solar panels. Now, that in itself is crazy. Then you've got these incentives. The Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. has made the U.S. one of the most compelling places to install renewable energy projects. Solar is a big one because of investment tax credits, because of production tax credits. Then you've got the fact that technology is changing also very rapidly in solar. So the most common technology right now, which is called PERC, it represents about 2/3 of all of the manufacturing capacity. Now, the two newer technologies that are coming on are called TOPCon and HJT. TOPCon takes up to 50% more silver per solar panel. HJT takes up to 150% more silver per solar panel. And just 3 years ago, these two technologies made up 10% of all the manufacturing capacity. This year, they're expected to make up already 1/3 of all the solar cell manufacturing capacity. So these higher consuming silver technologies are rapidly taking over and becoming the more dominant technologies in solar panels. So the amount of silver going into each panel is about to shoot upwards. So we're going to see even more silver required for the solar sector. And by 2027, which is just 4 years away, the International Energy Agency is forecasting that solar is going to overtake both coal and natural gas as the single biggest supplier of electricity worldwide. So solar is on its way, and it's going to need a heck of a lot more silver.
Yeah, that's quite a challenging context to wrap your head around too. You think about that much silver, that much solar. It sounds a little bit unbelievable, but one of the things you did talk about is maybe there is room to the downside, right? But if so, it's not going to be for very long. This brings me back to the whole reason I brought you back, right? Was to say volatility. Volatility is an opportunity for you to do something. You said volatility shouldn't scare you, right? So when I want to shift focus here a little bit, when I heard you talk, I was thinking in my head, man, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. I love Bitcoin. And I want to kind of make the same parallels here, right? You talk about volatility. You talk about how it's undervalued. You talked about the properties that created extra demand for it, like the helicopter money and the overprinting that devalued it. And these are the same things that impact, as the DXY, which helps us understand the relative value of the dollar, but also impacts relative value of assets like gold, silver, and Bitcoin. So when I hear the premise of volatility here, and I hear some of the contrasts you're making and the arguments you're making for why you're so bullish on silver, while I agree, I'm bullish on silver, I think it's going to do well. I'm sitting here as a Bitcoin guy going, well, it is undervalued. It is a scarce resource. It is used as safe as properties of monies as gold and silver. These are the things that you talk about where, you can kind of blur the lines when you start talking silver and I think Bitcoin. I almost feel like you're saying exactly what I'm thinking, but in terms of Bitcoin. So what I want to ask here is, how do you see the digital currencies coming in? Because as you agreed with me, we believe that these gold-backed, these central bank digital currencies, they're going to fail. They cannot succeed because the reality is gold in value. And Joe Brown from Heresy Financial says this very well. His argument is there is no real utility in mixing gold, which is having it in your hands, sovereignty, zero third-party counter risk, and having it in a blockchain where you can't access it and use it. So there's no utility in marrying blockchain with gold. I'm not certain about that 100%, but I suspect, like you, that people will realize it is a fake imitation of gold. Again, right. I also believe from the Bitcoin side, people will look at it and say, that's not even anything close to Bitcoin. What are you trying to do here? You're trying to trick all the gold people and think that they're stupid. So I'm coming here saying, guys, we need to start learning together. But I'm looking at Bitcoin and suggesting that, man, if I'm going to have a 2-year speculative outreach, when I understand the supply of Bitcoin is about to decrease in half based on math, there's no way that we're getting around that. It is being utilized as a global asset, not just for keeping your value from banks or having companies invest in it, but also as legal tender adopted by many countries. Where do you see Bitcoin fitting in here? And do you see, and I guess the question is at the end, we'll get to it, but where do you see Bitcoin fitting in here with the narrative of silver?
So interesting points, many interesting points. And you're right. There are a lot of arguments that apply both to silver and to Bitcoin, for example. Very, very similar price pattern behaviors, like quiet for extended periods and then explosive upside, and then big corrections as well. Scarcity, clearly, an issue as well. And it's funny you bring these points up because probably about 2.5 or so years ago, I wrote an article that was posted on Seeking Alpha, and the title was "Silver is the Next Bitcoin." And as you can imagine, I got a lot of.
I can imagine.
A lot of, yes.
3 years ago, especially.
Yes, that's right. So I got a lot of positive and a lot of negative comments. And so people thought, you shouldn't be comparing them. They're nowhere close to each other. And a lot of people on the opposite side said, yeah, I get it. It does make sense. And, I also even overlaid charts, and they tend to very much behave in the same way. So, I'm one who wants to and tries to stay open to the possibilities. I think that markets are very creative and rational over the longer term. And I think that there could very well be a place for some kind of a precious metals backed currency that is a cryptocurrency. I think the bottom line with that is going to be a matter of trust. That's and correct. There are many of them out there. I think that the market will do its job. Some will make it, some will not. But I think that what you're going to get, and it's interesting because I'm going to say about 1.5 years ago, there were two, this was a little bit after Russia walked into Ukraine. There were two largest gold-backed cryptocurrencies took off. and they had a combined market cap of over $1 billion. This was Pax Gold and I think Tether Gold, if I have those right, hopefully.
Yes, I
But
know exactly what you're talking about. That's correct.
I found that so interesting that I had this, when I thought about that, I had the sense that you had people who were perhaps in the crypto space, had not necessarily done well up until that point for a good maybe 6 to 12 months prior, because the space had gone through a difficult time. However, we're comfortable with the blockchain and all of that aspect of it, and saw how gold was actually had gone over $2,000 at that point, right around that time when Russia walked into Ukraine. So I guess I kind of concluded that you had a relatively large group of people who said to themselves, and I'm assuming somewhat younger, but that said to themselves, look, I'm comfortable with the blockchain. I'm comfortable with crypto, but
I'm
I
not
also
comfortable with the
want,
government-controlled fiat systems played on the blockchain.
right. And I'm also now seeing the potential for precious metals. I'm comfortable with a precious metals backed cryptocurrency. And I think that's really what happened at that point. And you saw people buying. I don't know where the market caps of those currencies stand right now, but it was very telling to see that kind of action take place in a relatively short period of time. And I think it speaks volumes to the potential for marrying these two kinds of true money, frankly.
I like to always end with this because, especially as we go into the symposium, I want to bring this back up to all of our speakers. And I'm going to ask you guys again this same question at the symposium, but I'm going to ask it today. So to frame that question, I'm going to give a little context. You said 2013. In 2013, an ounce of silver was roughly about $20. At that time, it took 23 million Satoshis. That's roughly 0.25, almost a quarter Bitcoin, to buy an ounce of silver. Today, silver is again roughly about, $20. And you know how much it costs today to take one of those Satoshic ounces? It's going to cost you roughly today, I'm going to look it up exactly, roughly 90,000 Satoshis. So at the end of the day, you have seen over time, it takes less Bitcoin to buy that same amount of gold, that same amount of silver. Understanding that, my question to you and everyone that I've had on the show is, if I gave you $10,000 today, you get to invest it in one asset class and you have to pull it out in 2 years, let's say 2025, where would you put your money? Bitcoin, gold, or silver?
Wow. Given, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, given the relatively short timeline from my perspective, and I would actually have to say gold. I would have to say gold
because see, these are the ones I love hearing. Yes, I love hearing a different opinion because then we can have discussion.
You bet.
Tell
Absolutely.
me because.
Yes, because I feel that it is going to be the one that I can have the most certainty about the acceptance and the size of the market and the retention of value in that sort of time frame. So my answer would be gold.
I like your answer. I hope you're right. But with that said, even $5,000 gold would really only give you a double right now from where we're at.
That's true.
And that's Bitcoin true. Being at $30,000 today, I'll make the call right now that by Christmas of 2025, I expect Bitcoin to be over $100,000. We'll have hit that point. So I'm looking at it 4 times and you're looking at a double, and we'll see which one comes first. I don't think either one of us will be right before symposium, but we'll find out.
Yeah, let's revisit it.
Thanks again, Peter, for your time today. And I do want to give you closing remarks. Again, remind people how to find you, how to follow you, because you are someone I want to keep up with and keep up to date as we lead up to the symposium. Maybe we'll even get you back on again, because I suspect a lot will happen between now and then. So final words?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I put this book together, The Great Silver Bull, a year ago. I basically put together what I thought people would want, which was a complete overview of the silver space. Why invest in silver? Its history, its uses, its potential, the huge investment upside potential, how to invest in it, and ultimately how and when to sell it. Because I do think that that's something that a lot of people will not bother to cover. So you're going to get the complete picture of how to get invested in silver and why through the book. Then I've got, for a more real-time following of the silver sector, my newsletter, The Silver Stock Investor, which is available at silverstockinvestor.com.
Which is the only silver newsletter focused on silver.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's where you'll find the best coverage. And then you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at, or now X. You can follow me at Peter_Krauth. I'm also on LinkedIn at Peter Krauth, and also on YouTube with my colleague Resource Maven. And so if you go to Resource Maven on YouTube, I post all sorts of videos there as well about how to, things going on in the silver space, how to invest in silver, how I would build my ideal silver portfolio, all these kinds of things to get people to provide information, explanations, and how you can get started and invested in this sector.
Thanks again, Peter. And for you guys, that information will be below in the YouTube channel as well, so that you guys don't have to frantically look. It's just look below. All that will be there for you. And if you like this, again, please like, share, subscribe, get the news out there, and follow me, Patrick Hakim, 21M on Twitter. Thanks, guys. Thank Peter again for coming on.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Patrick.